Okay, guys. Hey, what's going on? My name is Missy, and I'm the founder of The Body Intuitive, and I'm joined here today with my friend Brian. And I'm so excited because Brian and I have been building a relationship on Instagram. He's a really amazing mobility coach and strength and conditioning trainer, always doing really incredible stuff. And today we're actually here to talk about some sovereign sexuality stuff. So
Yeah,
we'll be getting a little personal with Brian and maybe in like a different area of his life. So welcome, Brian. Do you want to like tell us a little bit about yourself or what your current challenges are?
yeah, sure. I'm currently, like you said, a mobility coach. I'm running my own business, fairly busy. I tend to be a little overly busy. And like relationship wise, should I talk about that? Kind of what
Yeah,
I've been going
absolutely.
through.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, I kind of have a tendency to find myself in relationships with people who have some psychological issues that they can't be fully present. And I found myself being kind of overly accepting of behavior that is not really serving me well and end up staying in relationships probably longer than I should. Um,
Mhm.
so it's been kind of a challenge writing that out. And actually something that's pretty relevant is, so for like a very large chunk of my life, I was very uncomfortable with my sexuality. Um, I'm a straight male. It's not like anything out of the ordinary. It's just I was never overtly sexual. I didn't talk about like women. I didn't join in any kind of like guy, quote unquote, guy conversations. And I would just like help counsel my friends through their relationships because they would come to me. But I didn't have many serious relationships because I didn't put myself out there. I didn't really, yeah, I was kind of, it's like that guilt, shame over sexuality for a lot of years. Recent years, it's been much better.
Mhm.
So
When
yeah,
would you say that started to shift for you?
it started to shift. I'll be 33 in September, and it started to shift like between 28, 29, especially
Mhm.
29. Like I had decided to leave the job I was at. I had decided like I wanted more. And that's when just overall self expression and self love started taking hold in my life more. I was able to accept myself a little bit more. And I had this feeling of like possibility and freedom. And I left the job. I went on this big road trip, and I just realized how much I'd been holding back for so
Wow.
much of my life.
It's like
Yeah.
this latent or like undiscovered part of yourself that maybe you felt intuitively it was there in some ways, but just hadn't had the it's like a seed that's planted and it's not going to sprout and start growing until it's it's time, you know.
Right. Very true.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Well, thanks for sharing. And so for our call today, my intention is really just to offer some context or excuse me, some concepts and practices and tools that I think are going to help you address some of these underlying patterns and transform your relationship to your sexuality. So, um, since this is our first time speaking together in this way, I just wanted to lay out the groundwork of like what is sovereign sexuality because a lot of people don't know what that is, and it's kind of a term I made up and kind of a term that was passed down from my mentor and also kind of like a community who practices around these principles and ideas. So the whole basis of sovereign sexuality is that your sexuality is there to nourish you first and foremost and ultimately and always. So it takes it out of this guilt shame cycle that we're privy to with a lot of cultural conditioning, with our upbringing, with our religion, with different influences that have impacted our journeys at different ways, different relationships and people, and placing it into a context of what is our relationship to it first. And this goes beyond just like the love yourself before you love another. It really gets to, okay, how are we integrating and applying these practices in a holistic way to meet and tend to the underlying need or pattern within that? And so within that husk is the underlying shell of a lot of inner work, a lot of child work, a lot of trauma work, healing from past relationships, getting in touch with your emotions and things that a lot of men don't really have the safe space for in their life, even if they do have a good support system and good relationships. So is there somebody in your life that you feel comfortable like talking to about these subjects regularly?
Yes.
Or awesome. And
There
who is
is.
that for you?
Yeah.
Who is
So
that for you?
that is my cousin. His name is Sasha Newlinger. He actually released a documentary called Rewind, which is about his journey with child sexual abuse.
Wow.
So it's heavy. Anyway, he's the person that for the last 10 years, we just could at any point pick up the phone, talk for 3 hours, and yeah. So.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's really awesome. And what a blessing to have that in your life too, because, without that, it's like we get so stuck in our heads easily.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So bringing this back to your relationship patterns. So you are in a relationship, exiting a relationship.
Yeah, kind of. It's exiting a relationship at this point and figuring out how to gracefully do that in a way that you know does the least damage at this point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, can you summarize for me? I know we had an exchange before this, but just like the kind of the context for it, and you can disclose
Yeah.
as a little or as much as you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. So the woman I've been dating for almost 2 years now has had issues with depression and potentially dissociative identity disorder. It's hard to know, but will get really down about things triggered by things that have nothing to do with me, that are from issues from her past, and then will kind of dissociate, it seems, and will turn into a different person. Has broken up with me a number of times via text, will refuse to then speak on the phone. And so it's really the biggest thing that I have an issue with is the communication. Because if I can speak to someone face to face and kind of read their body language, and you see that it's a person on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
that's the real challenge, is a lot of stuff through text. But yeah, I think there's an immaturity there that I have put up with for too long, and that I've handled, because it's like when the person feels better and that cloud goes away, you're just grateful that they feel better and you want to be there for them. And it's really easy to then forget that you have needs too, especially when they're convinced that, I'm not getting enough, that they're not getting enough. So that's kind of been the pattern that's gotten progressively worse. And, last time she basically broke up with me, I agreed that this was a good course of action. And that's when she started kind of really freaking out about couldn't accept it and couldn't handle it. And now is doing all this deep work that I don't know why hasn't been done, 2 years ago, and that's a positive for her. But for me, it's okay, this is not something. You mentioned the mantra, reclaim your energy. And I keep
Mm-hmm.
saying that to myself, that's great. She's growing because of this, which is great, but I don't have to be a part of that. I don't need that in my life. And I'm comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly.
Mm-hmm. We're working on
That's what I'm telling
it.
myself, right?
Yes. Speak it into existence.
Right.
Yeah. So, and something that we were talking about before this call too was in multiple areas of your life, you were noticing this pattern of giving yourself more than you felt like was good for you, and this
Right.
pattern of feeling depleted and not nourished in the ways that you wish to be met in return, because the reciprocation just wasn't there for you. And it wasn't so much a statement about having a partner with mental health, but more of you were going beyond your capacity to be able to help other people. So there's almost like a martyrdom in that, and that I think was
Right.
reflecting, you said, in your work, by taking on too many clients and kind of undercharging for your work, and the level of skill that you have and the amount of experience you have, to your relationships where it was almost like a codependency, where it's your pattern was trying to help and fix and make it better. And her pattern was, the push pull of receiving that. And then it almost like buffered her from the growth she needed to face within herself in a way. Right. And so,
that's a great way of putting it.
So I see this pattern quite a bit with my male students, and I have also been on the other side of it where my relationships have ended because he felt like he was overgiving to me and his needs weren't being met. So I feel like I have a lot to offer and to say about this kind of situation. No, nobody's perfect or anything. But because I keep seeing it over and over again, I thought that this call in particular would be a great example to send out to my students, and maybe it can help people who are having the same issues or imbalances, as I like to call them. So I wanted to offer you the concept, and this is not to label or to diagnose you in any way. It's just a naming of the pattern that I think is happening. And once we can identify what that is, then we can bring that awareness into the realm of treatment, of making it better, right? So this all kind of revolves around like nice guy, hero, I'm going to say for complex. And it comes from a very genuine, pure intention of seeing somebody that you care about is encountering some kind of harm, whether, due to no fault of their own or things that are out of their control, or, life is hard sometimes. Like people fall into difficult circumstances, and there's such a will and a desire to try to make things better for that person that it goes past the point of being a supportive, open, empty, warm presence, like being a container, and it goes into the area of fix me, save me, right? Take on all my problems for me. You are now responsible for my stuff. And so going back to our very first concept, what is sovereign sexuality? That's when the energies get mixed, and it's like your stuff is now my stuff and my stuff is now your stuff, and we're both trying to fix it together. And there's almost like this enmeshment that happens, and a codependency can form, and it's not healthy because you're not in ownership of your own energies. And even though the intention is pure and genuine, and you both probably love each other very much, the dynamic is not nurturing healthy, positive patterns of how you cope with those things. So that's the pattern that I see play out, and the answer is like, okay, how do I disentangle myself from that and prevent that kind of thing from happening in the future? Like, how can I spot this kind of thing? And so I'm not even going to get into the realm of like, do or don't date people with mental health imbalances, because that's a very charged topic. And just because you have some, imbalances doesn't make you any less lovable, or doesn't make you any less worthy of love in any way. And there's also the practicalities of how do we interact in our day-to-day lives? What kinds of things are we responsible for? How do we build intimacy and connection? What is each of our responsibility? What are we offering to that partner so that we can continue to have a balanced exchange and feel that reciprocation, that give and take in the relationship? So I wanted to give you today like three different tools that immediately came to mind when you were telling me about your relationship situation. But before I dive into those, I just want to slow myself down and check in with you and see how this is all resonating.
It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense because, it sounds about right. I've gotten better. What's interesting is like, I can see levels to this because a previous relationship was worse and I put up with more, and she ended up ending it. And I was like, I realized how good of a thing it was and how much of a blessing it was. And I was like, why the hell didn't I do that? Why didn't I have the power to do that? And then I've grown. It's like I've learned to try not to fix, listen, provide support. But then if that's all you're doing constantly, like that's not great. It totally makes sense to me.
I totally hear that. And I also see that it really comes from a beautiful place of kindness and compassion. And so I don't want you to demonize these qualities about yourself. This is not, by no means am I suggesting like a hardening in some ways. You know, we're talking about things like boundaries and claiming your
Right.
space, and it can have this kind of like warrior energy to it, which it does
Yeah.
sometimes, you know, it has a charge to it. But that charge itself is a protection and an act of love. It's like we're being firm in the name of love, and not accepting behaviors that are going to cycle us into a negative spiral pattern. And so this phrase I gave you of like reclaiming your space and it's okay to want more than what you have is, and that kind of relates back to what you're saying earlier too about like growing up and kind of having this sexual awakening around like 28, 29 and coming into yourself. You know, you're just a few years into this journey, and so
Right.
it's not fair to you to place that really high expectation on yourself to be like, oh, I would know like fresh coming out the gate all my needs and desires, where my boundaries are, like this, that, the other thing. And so
Right.
people oftentimes get into these kind of healthy relationships because it's untested in a way. It's like they haven't seen themselves in these kinds of contexts. Not that you're calling in this person because you need to learn your lesson or anything like that, but they, you know, relationships are mirrors and they will trigger things within us that we then respond to and adapt to. So for this relationship, what I'm hearing intuitively in this, the message or the themes that I'm pulling out of the points of contention where, and where you can have the most control is over your relationship to yourself. It's very difficult to change another person. You know this as a coach. It's difficult to get people to
Absolutely.
change their
Yeah.
habits,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So, I mean, you know, if it's that hard to get somebody to do basic movement practices, imagine how difficult it is for somebody who's had 20, 30, 40, 50 years plus of a certain relationship to their sexuality and trying to change that. So the best thing that we can do is practice on ourselves, and our vibration will change, our perspective will change on how we relate to others, and then we'll just naturally attract in higher vibrational individuals and or be able to identify more quickly in the earlier stages of a new relationship when it's not an energetic match for us, when that compatibility is not there, because you're like, boom, these are my non-negotiables, and if that can't be met, like, it's not personal, it's just that this is my stuff and that's your stuff, and like our stuff doesn't match, you know.
Right. Yeah. There's no
It
reason
takes
to push against that resistance unnecessarily.
exactly, and it really requires a very strong rooting in yourself and an acceptance of what is and a clear insight into what's going on. um, so that being said, I want to offer these three practices because all of those things will give you a foundation and a basis to then bring that into your relationships and into your dating life if and when you decide that's something you want to revisit. So and also they will nourish you in this process of kind of off ramping from this relationship if that's what ultimately is decided.
Hmm.
So the first one I wanted to offer is called cycling your sexual energy, and this is the basis for a lot of the sovereign sexuality work that I do. A lot of guys are socially conditioned to be like, if it moves and I want to, then I want to have sex with it. You know, it's like,
Yep.
yeah, they're very like, oh, we don't have any impulse control, like all these really, really challenging narratives to deal with. And so we are turning that energy on its head and we're saying, no, actually, your sexual energy is a very powerful and potent force. And the more discernment and self-mastery that you have over that force, the more you can upcycle it within yourself, the better control you'll have. And you can bring that containment to your partner. And that makes it easier for, you said you're a straight guy, so I'll say a woman, to relax into that space with you and to offer her feminine surrender, especially in intimate exchanges. Super, super yummy. So
Hmm.
for cycling your sexual energy, the core that we're tapping into is what's called your root hara energy. And so I know you're very movement oriented and mobility oriented. So you have a little bit more anatomical knowledge than most of my students, but it's basically the space between your hips all the way back into your anus and your tailbone, and includes the genitals in the front of the body. So that whole area includes your root energies and your sacral energies. So we want to really like tap into that and notice anytime that you feel like a sexual charge or get turned on, or notice something that like gets that energy going. Instead of the masculine energy is naturally very like penetrating and like outwardly focused. Think about inverting that and upcycling it through the entire length of your spine with the breath. Good. And then exhale, just bring it back down into your root. So you can think about it from the root all the way up through the spine, into the heart, into the back of the throat, all the way through the crown of the head. Let it become diffuse. And then exhale, everything comes back down. And imagine that energy like coming down through the tailbone and into the earth. And like you have a core connection to the earth. So you're anchored where you are physically in this moment, feet on the ground. And that is a closed circuit, closed cycle. You can imagine your spine almost like a rod, like an electrical rod. Just bring it on up and then exhale it back down. So I like to teach the 3-part breathing, where you inhale into your belly, diaphragm, chest, and then chest, diaphragm, belly. If you're not really an experienced breather, for someone like you who's very athletic and is probably related to breath in like of a more of a movement capacity way, I challenge you to think about this as more of like an energetic thing. So you can really visualize, like close your eyes and really sit with this and feel into the sensation of that energy moving within you. The more clearly you can describe that or communicate it or write about it or journal with it, the stronger relationship that you'll have with it. So that's the first one, is to take those energetic charges, those sexual turn-ons and all those things, and allow it to nourish you, and have that be a practice of keeping your energy contained. First and foremost, it's like, this is nice to receive, and then I'm going to keep it for myself.
Right.
And I'm not going to push it out onto anything. I'm not going to push it out onto porn. I'm not going to push it out onto photos of somebody else. I'm not going to push it out onto a relationship that I have someone. It's just for me, right?
Yeah. I've played with that before. And actually there's other source of energy that I can imagine that breath moving up the spine. And so that's pretty cool.
Cool. Okay. So
Yeah.
you've had some practices like that before?
I have, and probably not been consistent lately, but there was a time where I was like really focused on that. So that makes sense to me.
Awesome. So like take that energy, that arousal energy, and just like spread it throughout your whole body. And let that just become this really like warm, diffuse energy that contains you and fills you in a way. Because masculine desires, like it's a metaphor for how our reproductive organs work, right? It's like you fill up with desire, and then the desire is emptied, and then you fill back up, and then it's emptied. You know, that's how masculine desire and orgasm works. Feminine desire and orgasm works differently than that. So that's another topic for another day. But for you, we're practicing being in that cycle in a very somatic and gentle way, where your breath is helping you to link the actual energetic charge and physically the sensations that are happening in your body. So this is like just the first step of the foundation. So you can take your practices and just have a little fun with it and be like, oh, let me bring this into this realm of my life and experiment and see how that plays with you, or how that energy plays with you and you play with it. The second practice I wanted to offer is called the Sword of Discernment. So we tend to decide things. Oh, can you hear me okay? Ruh-roh. Hey, Brian, can you hear me okay?
I'm in trouble, actually.
I'm going to turn your video off. Hopefully that makes it better. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Yes.
All right.
I cannot see you, but I can hear you fine. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Better? Okay.
Yep.
Good?
All good.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. We'll edit out maybe later. Okay, cool. So the second practice is called the Sword of Discernment. So if you think about your lingam, like a sword, we tend to make decisions either with our genitals or with our heads. So we want our minds, our hearts, and our genitals to all be in alignment with each other and making good decisions for our life. Sometimes we make decisions from one area of our body. Sometimes we make decisions from another area of our body. I would say in sovereign sexuality, we don't necessarily focus on one, but we focus on cultivating our energies in each center and discernment practices in each center, and then combine them together so they're resting into alignment. And so that first practice I mentioned, where you're breathing, is a fundamental alignment practice where you're consciously moving energy and light through those channels, and so they become more aligned in that process. The sort of discernment practice is kind of that next step where you're basically discerning, excuse my French, but like how many fucks to give to a certain situation. You have a limited, where this is not just like free fucks anymore. It's like there's limits,
You have a quota.
You have a quota, and your inner resources are limited. Your time, your love, your attention, not your capacity for love, but to really invest into a relationship and be with that person and build a life with them, it's like you have to make a decision. So a lot of sexuality actually revolves around our ability to make decisions. And especially for masculine sexuality, this is the core of their mastery, is how do I make decisions for myself, and how do I respond when it's my responsibility to make decisions for another human being, when I'm in charge of their care, when they're trusting me with their body, when they open into that place of surrender with me. So just having a general practice of discernment is a great way to develop that kind of self-mastery. And so when you do decide to open yourself up to someone sexually, it's a full body yes. It's a full body opening, reciprocation. You're able to be much more present with that person. It's a much more natural energetic connection. Communication happens a lot easier. And so fundamentally, there may have been some parts of your relationship that were a compatibility issue, where maybe you notice some patterns in the beginning, but you're kind of like hanging on to try to fix it, or maybe it's going to get better, or maybe something will change and go different. And within that process, you have to decide at a certain point, what's too much for me? What's too many fucks to give? And I'm not saying don't give any fucks. Like there's a certain range between 0 and too many for any given situation, right? And we want to be able to retain enough energy, containment, right? Reserve some of that for yourself, so that we don't feel depleted and empty, so we can fill ourselves back up with desire, so that we can have enough space between ourselves and another person to want to return to that sense of closeness. When we're so enmeshed with the other person, it's like, oh, I kind of need to get away from them a little bit, and that energy can be confusing, because it's like, no, well, I actually really love this person, and it reinforces kind of like that toxic push-pull cycle where, if you feel enmeshed for a while, then naturally you're going to want to come back to yourself super hard as a guy, and then it starts this like pendulum swinging of energies.
Yeah.
Where she's like, well, where did you go? I miss you now. And like it sets off the anxious attachment style a lot.
That makes sense. And just pull you right back.
And just pull you right back. And then you're like, okay, everything's better. I'm going to help you. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to make it better. You become enmeshed again. And then you're like, but wait, I feel depleted again. And it's just this whole cycle. So, whew.
And that's what I've absolutely felt that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I've been there too. So totally felt. I've been in it before, so that's why I can speak to it. Because again, nobody's perfect. Like, even though I'm able to speak to it, I'm still working on like my own stuff, just like anybody else. So, So yeah, that's the sort of discernment practice, which is you can think about it like, okay, I'm cutting through the BS, and the sooner I make a decision from a place of alignment and integrity with all of my energy, my sacral sexual energy, my heart loving energy, and my mind, my rational thinking energy, then you can bring that into a place of clear, compassionate, decisive action. And that, again, is a very yummy, embodied masculine place to be, because life gets simpler, life gets clear. It's very clear cut. It's like, again, it's a very like penetrative energy. So you can use that to your natural advantage in these situations, because you already have, as a man, a better understanding than that than most women do.
Mm-hmm.
Relatively speaking, these are
Right.
generalizations. I don't want to offend
Right.
anybody. It's always a range. It's always a range,
Yes.
and we're always dynamic beings that are shifting and evolving. So that was the second practice. Do you have any questions on
I
that
don't
one?
think so. Yeah, I what I
Okay.
hadn't mentioned was I tend toward, for most of my life, I tended towards like overcompensating for what I saw in culture, which was like cut off the sexuality, think only with your brain. And like it's like for years I almost prided myself on it. It's like I'm not, but then you're totally out of balance and just like you can't
Yeah.
connect the way you should.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's like an embodied like trust thing. It's like you have to trust your mind and your heart and in your cock. You have to trust all of it to make a decision. And so it's
yeah.
like, think, that's something that you can also explore in your masturbation practices and your self-touch practices and your sexual practices with your partners. Like, how am I using this charge to enhance my decision making
Yeah.
and enhance my discernment in how I'm allocating my resources, both energetically and financially, et cetera, et cetera. Cool.
Makes sense.
Cool. Okay. So the last thing I want to give, and then we'll wrap this up today. We talked about semen retention really briefly. So
Mm-hmm.
within this big umbrella of upcycling your sexual energy, of practicing discernment, of practicing containment within yourself, it's helpful to also incorporate a practice of retaining your semen. So you can, I don't know, I'm sure you've heard of edging before. It's
Mm-hmm.
basically that practice. So work yourself up to a point, up to like a soft edge where you're like, oh, I'm about to get there. And then practice your breath, practice upcycling that energy, let it, everything spread throughout the entire body, breathe with it, chill back out, and then you can try it again. And that helps you practice in situations that are really charged, staying in your body and having that sense of, I guess, greater mastery over being able to come back off from a ledge. Does that make sense? So it's like
Yes.
when things start to get emotionally heated in a partnership argument, it's like, how can we de-escalate that situation before it gets to yay level? How can we grow together as a couple and kind of brush up against challenging conversations that are potential conflicts, and then back off of it and come back to a point of foundations and basics and connections? Rarely in relationship just powering through something really work and get the desired result. As you know, being a mobility coach, if somebody comes in and something's a challenge for them and then they just try to extra load that weight or that movement, what happens?
Yeah.
They get injured.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same concept that applies emotionally into our relationships. So I invite you to just explore applying that same understanding that you have from your physical practices into your emotional and sovereign sexuality practices, especially with masturbation, because it's an extension of all of these other energetic concepts. And it's one very practical way to apply the concepts that we're talking about. It's like, okay, I'm going to allow myself to enjoy and play and be with this energy, but I'm not going to take it over the edge. I get to decide when when I empty myself, when I let go and allow myself that release, because it feels good for me and it's an appropriate environment for me to do that.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm not saying don't give a fuck. It's just when it's the right moment, let it fly,
Right.
What's the right moment, you'll know. But it's like you want to practice holding back a bit until you get there. And so the overall theme here is, okay, you want to be a really giving, compassionate, kind person. And the way to do that is actually to apply more discernment and make sure you're really tending to and containing your energy. So when it is time to give, you are giving to the things that are also going to reciprocate and give you something back that's going to be equally nourishing for you. And that is fundamentally what we all want out of our relationships, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm on board with that.
So very common imbalance that I see, very common patterns that I see playing out, especially for my guys. And I wanted to share these 3 practices because I feel like I'm just saying the same things over and over again. And the more people know about these tools and practice them, I think the better time we'll all have figuring out either how to balance the dynamics within the relationships we're already in, or if it's not a salvageable situation and you keep getting this reactivity and response, then using your sort of discernment, you can decide what's the next best action for you and where's a better place to invest your resources and your energy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that.
Okay. Cool.
Very cool. That's again something I kind of practiced, like actually with the like the semen retention with the cycling energy. Though when I had it was I done it for a while, but it was not so much like cycling. My imagining was just sort of diffusing, but not. There's like another part to it that you described that, anyway, that is very helpful.
Yes. 2 words for you is containment and discernment. So I would, you can practice those as a mantra. That can be like your theme for this week. And I'd be curious to hear how it goes for you. If you have any questions, of course, you can text me or email me.
I will certainly let you know. Yeah.
I'm excited for you. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing yourself and being open today and being vulnerable and being in this space with me. I really appreciate it. And I hope these practices serve and nourish you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the guidance.
Of course. All right. Well, take care, my brother. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.